We're going to start our immigration spotlight. I just want to inform everyone that we will be recording this, right? Sally, you got the recording?
Yes.
So for those who may not want to be on video, you can turn off your video. So again, welcome. My name is Rosa Lizardi. I'm a co-member of the Loreto community. I'm also a member of the Latin American and Caribbean Committee. And welcome to our Immigration Spotlight, which is an initiative of the Latin American and Caribbean Committee. And just by way of background, I see we have some new folks. The Latin American and Caribbean Committee was founded in 1985. And our mission is to be a source of hope, a healing presence, and a force for change. While seeking justice and peace for those that are impacted by the inhumane immigration policies and decades-long interventionist foreign policy of the U.S. throughout the region. We have a few initiatives. One you may know is the Loreto Border Trip, which is a transformative immersion experience that seeks peace and justice at the U.S.-Mexican border through direct encounter with migrants and justice workers. And we also are involved with solidarity with the farm workers and with asylum seekers and detainees. So for today's program, we have a program, a very special program that is going to be focusing on the Supreme Court decision upholding Daca. And we're also going to be talking about moving forward on the American Dream and Promise Act. And we have a wonderful speaker who is going to provide all of the background details and speak of Daca. And later we hope to have a woman who is a dreamer.
I see her. She's there.
Oh, fantastic. Great. So what I'll do is I'll introduce both of you, and then we'll have our first speaker kind of give an overview, and then we'll have our second speaker give more information and details and personal accounts. So our first speaker is Julia Guzman, who is an immigration attorney in Littleton, Colorado. She specializes in marriage and family-based petitions, citizenship, and humanitarian visas. She received her BA from University of Texas, Austin, and her Juris Doctor from Georgetown University Law Center. She's the daughter of Nicaraguan immigrants, and we welcome her today to speak on these issues. And let me introduce our second speaker, Dulce Garcia. Thank you so much for joining us on such short notice. Dulce Garcia is an attorney in San Diego, living in, she's Mexican American, and she's the main bio here, and you can tell us more about your work, Dulce, is that she was a named plaintiff that in the Daca case, which sued Trump and the Trump administration after the termination of Daca in September 2010. And as a result of those efforts, hundreds of thousands of Daca recipients are able to renew their Daca status while the case is in litigation. And Dulce was in the Supreme Court last November defending Daca. So thank you so much for joining us. What I'm going to ask our Sally to do is to spotlight Julia and then spotlight Dulce. So we have about 15 minutes to begin with, Julia, and then we can go to Dulce.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to go too much into the case then, since Dulce is here, and obviously she knows a lot more than I do about it. So I'll just give you a little background instead, and then if, whenever whatever she's able to add, and if we can just kind of go back and forth, I guess. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and that program was announced back in June of 2012 and began in August of 2012. The basic provisions under DACA are that if you were under the age of 31 when the program was announced, which was specifically June 15th, 2012, you came to the United States before reaching your 16th birthday, you've continuously resided in the United States since 2007, since June 15th, 2007, up until the time that you file, and you were physically present in the United States on June 15th, 2012, and also at the time that you're applying. You can apply if you have no lawful status on June 15th of 2012, you're currently in school or have graduated from high school or have a GED, and you have not been convicted of a felony, significant misdemeanor, or 3 or more other misdemeanors, and don't have any other threat to national security as far as they're concerned. You have to be at least 15 to apply for DACA when you apply, and the permit is good for 2 years. The cost is $495. So basically, when DACA has been in effect, you have been able to apply to renew it for every 2 years. And what that gives you is, it makes you a low priority for deportation. Of course, if you commit crimes or any other reason is found, they can be deported. And it gives you a work permit, authorization for employment. So you apply for both of those things at the same time, for the DACA status and for the employment authorization. President Obama did try to expand that to go beyond that, those dates, so that we could have current young people as well be able to apply, and he tried to expand it so that parents of American citizens could receive deferred adjudication as well. That was DAPA, but both of those efforts were unsuccessful because of lawsuits. So we've had DACA in place, and when President Trump said he was going to end the program, he didn't do so with an executive order. Rather, they tried to say that the program was unlawful. So, and again, I'll let Dulce talk about kind of where that went. But in the meantime, what they've been able to do while it's been in litigation is people have been permitted to continue to renew their DACA status and to work. So again, these are young people, and I know many of you know this, over 700,000, maybe close to 800,000, who are educated or getting educated and who have not committed any criminal offenses. They pay about $3 billion in taxes, or at least that's what it was in 2017. And they are, they've only known the United States for the most part. Most of them came when they were very small. Many of them don't speak the language of their country of birth. They don't know that culture. So what we've been looking at in terms of legislation is what was called the DREAM Act and is now called the American Dream and Promise Act of 2019. That was the most recent effort in Congress, and it did pass the House last June, a year ago actually, on June 4th of last year. It was HR 6, but it got stuck in the Senate. So that bill would have canceled and prohibited the removal proceedings against the young people that fit in certain qualifications. Excuse me. So let me see here. It says, shall cancel removal proceedings against aliens who entered the United States as minors and grant such aliens conditional permanent resident status for 10 years. The other time when we hear that term, conditional permanent resident, is when you petition for your new spouse as a U.S. citizen. So if you just got married and you want to petition for your spouse, you get what's called a conditional permanent resident status for 2 years. Then you're able to apply for what's called lawful permanent status, which is a 10-year green card. So this conditional permanent resident status would be unusual to have it for 10 years, but that's what they were proposing in this. So it'd be a 10-year conditional status, and there would be qualification requirements such as, again, continuous physical presence in the United States, being enrolled in or having completed certain educational programs, streamlined procedure to apply for the residence for aliens who had received DACA status previously and were not disqualified for renewal. And they remove the conditional permanent resident status granted if the person applies and meets certain requirements, Let me see here. One of the requirements could be serving at least 2 years in the uniformed services. And it says cancel removal proceedings against them who qualified for temporary protected status also was included. So including TPS in this legislation is really important because they don't have coverage either, because a lot of those programs are in limbo right now as well. And let's see, so then after the 10 years is when they would be able to apply for the lawful permanent status and eventually their citizenship. So it's a path to citizenship, but it's a long path to citizenship. At the current time, DACA recipients don't have anything like that. The only time that they can have a path to citizenship is if they have some other method, either they've married a US citizen, for example, or perhaps they're a parent, became one at some point, or became a resident. There's different ways, but nothing through just being here. And there's a lot of misunderstandings and miseducation in the immigrant community, where people will call and say, you know, well, I've been here for 10 years, so I can get my residency right, or my citizenship now. And I'm like, that's not a thing. You know, they'll say that there's a lot of things like that that get kind of spread around. But in fact, there isn't a path to citizenship for most people who would like to get it, no matter how long they're here, no matter how well they've done, no matter how hard they've worked, if they don't have a relative or if they don't have special training. If an employer wants to try to help them, it's extremely costly, and it takes a lot of work, especially now that a lot of those work visas have been canceled by the president. So there aren't a lot of other methods. So this legislation is extremely important to be able to help these kids. And again, I'm going to let, let's see if she's still, yes, she's still there. I'm going to let Dulce go ahead and talk about the legislation and kind of where that is, and then maybe we can both take questions, if that works.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Julia. So yes, Dulce, please, it's really an honor and privilege to have you speak with us. So we want to hear about the case, and we also want to hear about your personal experience and the organization you work with, Border Angels. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Julia. That's exactly right. I came here to the US in 1987, and I still don't have a path to citizenship for me. And it's not because I don't want it. I would love to be a US citizen one day. Actually, I'm looking forward to sitting in a jury box one day. As much as people try to avoid jury duty, it's one of the things I'm actually looking forward to as a lawyer. So it doesn't matter how much we accomplish. You know, I come from a very humble background. When we crossed the border, I mean, we didn't have anything. All we had was each other, our family. And I was holding on to my older brother with one hand and my mom with the other hand when we crossed over. And you know, my family is everything to me. And to me, when we talk about these policies, when we talk about the Promise, Dream and Promise Act, or any other Dream Act, or permanent fix to DACA, or whatever it is that we're talking about with protecting dreamers, it's my older brother and my family, my parents that I have in mind, especially here in San Diego, because we have both ICE and Border Patrol. So we have this double deportation force here. And then we often get threatened with more militarization, bring in the National Guard and such. You know, it happens all the time with this president threatening our immigrant community. So it's, you know, it's important to highlight that this is, as Julia was saying, not a path to citizenship. Obtaining DACA just gave me a huge relief from being deported. You know, there's a lot of good things that we can do with the ability to work lawfully. You know, I often worked jobs like I did, you know, waitered. I would sell flowers, park cars, you know, anything just to save up the dollars so I could pay for my school. At that time in California, there was no California Dream Act, so I was paying out of tuition. I was paying school tuition as if I was a foreigner, as an out-of-state student. And so it was really difficult to not only enroll in school, but also thrive and graduate and then move on to law school. You might have seen some tweets from the president saying, "Oh, these dreamers they're not even young anymore." And the reality is, yes, I'm not young anymore. I've been waiting for this for so long. We obtained DACA not because Obama thought about it from, overnight one day, woke up and said, I'm going to treat these young folks as they should be treated and protect them some way. It was because a lot of folks were risking deportation, getting arrested. While I was enrolled in law school was when there were talks of DREAM Act, only as a result of the organizing by a lot of young undocumented folks. And that resulted in DACA, which was a compromise. We didn't get comprehensive immigration reform. DACA recipients didn't get a path to citizenship. All we received was this work permit and this ability to stay here without worrying about being deported, at least temporarily. I didn't apply for DACA right away because I didn't trust the federal government providing all of my information, having been here in the US for decades, hiding in the shadows, as we say. I was always overlooking my shoulder, always distrusting anyone. Even in law school, I couldn't tell anyone that I was undocumented because I was afraid that they were going to turn me into ICE. And so once I saw after 2 years of the program running that people were not being put in detention centers, they were actually changing their lives with DACA, that's when I applied and I received it the year that I graduated from law school. And it was a game changer. I was able to go to the government offices and register my law practice and get a driver's license and get my social security number. The officer at the Social Security Administration, I remember him vividly because he had on his office, he was a military person and he had all these awards and photos that from his service. And I remember when we were doing the paperwork, he said to me, "Congratulations, I know you guys have been waiting for this for so long." And I just couldn't hold it. I remember I was sobbing because it was a long road to get to that point, to be able to just earn at least minimum wage. Know that there are protections in place because we're undocumented, but the law was there for us having a lawful work permit. So when the president took away DACA and Jeff Sessions announced in the rescission that we were benefiting from participating in the Social Security system, I cringed when I heard that because I know for a fact that no matter how much I contribute to the Social Security system, I will never, ever be able to get a single dollar out from it because we're not legal permanent residents, because we're not U.S. citizens, because we are just only contributing to the country with our labor, but not receiving these programs in exchange. So when I heard Jeff Sessions announce the rescission of the DACA program in September 2017, one of the first things I thought about was we should sue. But luckily there were other folks that were also thinking the same thing. And then we sued 2 weeks after the rescission of the program. And that's what allowed in January to bring back DACA renewals. But since 2017, we haven't been able to travel abroad. So advanced parole is something that was available to us before Trump took away DACA. And that allowed us to travel for 3 reasons: for educational reasons, for work, and then the humanitarian reasons, which means for the last 2.5 years, since we haven't been able to travel, we've seen our family die across the border and we can't go say our goodbyes. I've had so many people call my office and say, my dad is in the hospital right now. We don't think he's gonna make it. Can I go visit him? I have DACA. And had Trump not taken away DACA, the answer would have been, we could perhaps try to do advanced parole on an emergency basis, and then you can go at least bury your parent. And since 2017, we've had to watch funerals through Skype, if that even is available, because in some remote places, the internet's not even available then. So we have to consider the human impact with these policies. Trump took away DACA And I do imagine he did consider these things and just didn't care about it. I really do think that the reason behind the rescission of Daca is both political, because he knew that the program is so successful. With all the statistics, all the studies show that Daca has contributed in taxes and the economy in various ways. For the first time, people are getting their degrees in college, applying for credit cards, buying homes, cars, and so the program's working. And I think the president knew that, and using that was to his advantage to put us in a panic mode. So for him to be able to use us as political bargaining chips and obtain something that would be harmful to our community, such as bringing the wall, cutting lawful migration in half, what we call family reunification, and he calls chain migration, and other things like he was threatening to cut the visa lottery program. This was all part of the 4 pillars of his immigration plan that he outlined in 2017, right when we were desperate because we thought, we were going to be running out of time to protect the Daca program. Luckily, as a result of our lawsuit, we didn't have to compromise to such a thing. But I mean, I gotta say it again, like, I would rather remain undocumented than bring all these harmful policies onto the border, especially when it comes to militarization at the border. I would rather remain undocumented than keep contributing to this wall that has resulted in over 11,000 deaths. Last year, Border Patrol confirmed 281 deaths for the fiscal year in 2018. And they haven't given us the numbers for 2019. I don't know why, if they report on everything else, but they don't report on the amount of deaths of people crossing the border, except that it looks bad on them. And so the other reason why I do think that the program was rescinded was also a discriminatory basis. I really do think that this president attacked us because this president knows the majority of DACA recipients, about 70%, come from Latin American countries, specifically Mexico, as I do. And seeing that, I really do think that if DACA recipients had been a majority of European students, that he wouldn't have done such a thing as rescinding the program the way that it did, knowing that it was going to have such a big human impact on all of our lives. In the last 2 years, especially in the last few months, knowing that this decision was coming, it's been really difficult. It's been a lot of anxiety as we're trying to cope with a world pandemic. And, we were facing the possibility of losing at the Supreme Court, and then seeing people get rounded up and put in detention centers and deported. Because this president had made it clear from the very beginning, anyone that is undocumented should be afraid. And that's the reality that we have lived. Last year, there were over 100,000 high school students that graduated without any protection from deportation, without DACA, that would have applied for DACA had the program still been in place. And so these folks are, as they're looking into their future, planning ahead, their lives were in limbo up until recently when the decision came out. And even then, this president continues to threaten the program and just says he's going to start over again with its precision, and he's going to try again to end it, following the rules this time. So because DACA is not a permanent program, we still have this risk, and we're still going to have it unless we change things in Congress and unless we have a different president. Unfortunately, our lives are going to be in limbo until we have a path to citizenship. And I look forward to that day where I can finally submit an application to become a legal permanent resident and eventually a U.S. citizen, hopefully before my retirement years.
So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what actually ends up coming out of this case and why it is that it's not really, it's kind of a temporary win, but it could be a loss tomorrow if the president decided to do an executive order. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of why it's the procedural part and all that stuff?
Yeah, so we didn't win because the Supreme Court declared the program constitutional. We won on what they call a technicality. In simple terms, the way that the president went about taking the program away was not according to the APA. So he can start again if he follows the right procedures for taking the program away. But we don't, I mean, this isn't going to be overnight. If he's going to follow those procedures, there has to be an announcement that needs to be made. There will be time for us. And hopefully by that time, you know, we would have probably gone through the election period and have a different president. And if not, then at the minimum, I know that we would be filing further lawsuits. But you know, the point is this president continues to want to use us as political bargaining chips to advance its anti-immigrant agenda. But as far as the APA and the procedures that he would have to take, these wouldn't, he wouldn't rescind Daca overnight. But you know, we saw with the census case, he threatened to start over again after he lost at the Supreme Court case and received a similar directive from the Supreme Court saying you have to do it a different way. So we don't know whether he's just you know, just threatening us again. There are empty threats. But you know, if he knew how to do it the right way the first time, I think he would have done it right the first time. So I don't know. It's just a speculation at this time whether he would do it or not. And again, that's part of the reason why we have so much anxiety, is because it's been over a week and we still don't see that the Immigration Service has opened up the DACA application process for new DACA recipients. And so, you know, we feel like this president keeps playing games with us, and ultimately it's playing games with our lives.
Yeah, basically the court saying that, number one, that they can that the courts can review agency actions, and that number two, that since they didn't address the deferment, the consideration of considerable reliance, that interests that the people had at stake. So basically, you know, you rely on this for your work, you rely on it for your home, your family, all that, and they ended it arbitrarily and capriciously with no reasoned explanation, that wasn't acceptable. So presumably, if they go into, well, here's why we think we should end it, that they could. That's very scary for everybody who's dependent on this program. A couple of thoughts I had just as Dulce was talking was that yeah, the idea that you once you apply, you're now in the system, so the government knows where you are. So if they do end the program, all these people, these young people who are in the system now, if they decide to deport them, it's a lot easier to find them than it would be for the people who are in the shadows. So that's a huge risk that they've taken. And anybody who decided to apply now, right now, we don't actually know at this moment whether we can submit new applications for people who fit those guidelines, because presumably we should be able to. But if you go to the USCIS website, it says that they're not accepting new applications yet, just renewals. So we're kind of proceeding with the assumption that we will be able to soon, and trying to get people ready for that. But again, it's a big risk, because what if they now apply and then tomorrow they end it successfully? Now all those people are in the system as well. The other thought I had was about the lawful entry with advanced parole that Dulce was talking about. Not only does that mean that you can go and see your dying parent, or whatever purpose you wanted to go for, the, you know, study abroad or whatever it is, but if you come back in with a lawful entry, because these folks don't have lawful entries, that opens up the possibility for you to then get your green card through marriage or through some other way. Because if you currently, right now, if you marry a U.S. citizen but you entered unlawfully, it's really hard, if not impossible, to get your green card, because you don't have that lawful entry, and that's very important. The entry with inspection is what we call it. So that's another thing, is that we were able to, with DACA people, we were able to say, hey, have you gone to visit your family because they were sick or whatever other reason? And they'd say yes, so they enter with lawful entry. Now we can do a regular family petition, which is what I do most of. So those are the kind of the points I thought of. Yeah, I don't know if you don't have anything else to add right now, I don't know if people wanted to had any questions that they wanted to ask.
No, just a comment on what you just explained. I think politically, that's one of the reasons why they took away the advanced parole part, because they were calling it a loophole for DACA recipients that were married to a U.S. citizen and then applying to become a legal permanent resident after traveling. And when I have gone to DC, and I've traveled to DC a few times and spoken both with Democrats and Republicans, that's why we kept hearing about this so-called loophole, when really less than 2% of DACA recipients were actually benefiting from that so-called loophole. And so the majority of DACA recipients were not traveling. Some of them didn't even know about advanced parole until the program had already ended. And it costs money. It costs, at that time, I think it was $575 for the advanced parole application, plus all the traveling expenses to do that. And so a lot of people didn't take advantage of that. But I think that was the reason why they took it away, was because they didn't want DACA recipients to become legal permanent residents that way, which is ironic because I often keep being told, do it the right way, do things the right way. And I feel like I've been following everything that I've been told except from self-deporting. That's the only thing I haven't listened to Trumpsters, but it's like, what more do I need to do to prove to everyone that I deserve to be here and that this is my home? I feel American in every single way. I mean, I do respect my traditions and where I come from. I don't remember Mexico because I haven't stepped into it in over 30 years. And so I feel like I do belong in this community. I do employ U.S. citizens. And more than that, we contribute to our culture. Here in San Diego, we have 40,000 DACA recipients in San Diego County. I feel like this county wouldn't be the same without us here.
Well, and that loophole and the chain migration, quote unquote, are how Melania Trump and her whole family is here in the United States.
Yeah,
so I mean, it's kind of ironic, Yeah,
I think the in-laws ruined it for us.
That could be. So does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, let me open the floor to if anyone has any questions. And thank you, Julia, for facilitating some of this technical language, and thank you, Dulce, for this incredible personal account. I know that everyone here is behind you and all of the dreamers who want a path for citizenship. Let me invite Maureen, who invited Julia and is one of the organizers of the Immigration Spotlight. Maureen, do you want to throw out a question, comments?
Well, I'll just comment. I remember when the Dreamers were in Denver, they did a road trip and they were going across the country, and it was all these young people, and they had locked themselves into the Democratic headquarters on 9th, I think, like 9th and Broadway. And they were talking back and forth to Obama's people. And this was right before Obama did the created DACA. So it was intense pressure. And these kids really had put themselves out there, because you don't just take over a building, it was, and they did. And I was just so impressed. They were doing a fast, and they were inside the building and we were outside the building and we could see them. And it was such strength. I think we've talked about this in the Latin American Caribbean Committee. We talk about vulnerable populations, but there was such strength. They were much stronger than we were on the outside. And I was just so impressed with that. I guess my question would be, if the Senate passed a version of the Dream and Promise Act, would they need enough votes to override the president's veto? Is that how it would work?
Probably, but at this point, hopefully, like, you know, we'll see a turnover of the government. But yeah, I don't believe, honestly, that if we were able to get a Republican Senate to pass it, that the president would veto it. Because honestly, the reason he didn't do, in my opinion, an executive order to begin with is because he knows that it's an incredibly popular program, even among his own followers and certainly among business owners. So the fact is, if he were actually to go out of his way to veto something that was supported by Republicans, that there would be nothing in it for him. So I don't believe that that would be where that would go. I think if he does anything, as Dulce was saying, he has the opportunity and the possibility to do something, but I don't know that he will, because again, I think it's something like, I wrote down the statistic, but I want to say it's something like 60-something% of his own followers, of his own supporters, it says an overwhelming majority of Americans, 74%, including 64% of Trump supporters, support the Dreamers. So I don't see that as, and that's, I think, why he didn't do it, quote unquote, the right way, is because what they said was, oh, it's an illegal program. Obama stepped out. The only time that the president's position has been that there are limits on the president's power is when Obama did something. So he's like, he went outside of his own, power to do this program, and the Supreme Court didn't even, they said, no, that's not how we do this. So
I just wish that Roberts, instead of saying arbitrary and capricious, because that sounds so whimsical for what it really is. It's diabolical and hateful. The other words are just too flighty.
those words haven't made it into the law, though,
No.
so they have to use the ones that they have.
And you two would know that.
Thank you, Maureen. Molly has a question. If you can just introduce yourself, maybe your affiliation with Loreto and where you're calling from.
Sure. I'm Molly. I'm a member of the LACC committee as well, and calling from New York, and also an attorney. So thank you for this clarification. I was wondering what the next steps in the legal fight or in the advocacy fight would be, instead of just waiting for Trump, waiting to see what Trump does. Like, what is the next fight? Kind of just keeping the status quo? In what ways can the DREAM Act be expanded? Who should we be talking to make those steps happen? That kind of thing.
Dulce, do you want to take that one?
Sure, thank you. We have to put this on the Senate floor. We really do think it'll pass if it gets onto the Senate floor. So Kamala Harris and other senators have signed a joint letter asking Mitch McConnell to put this on the floor for a vote, and then problem solved, right? It's likely not going to happen, but it's good to pressure especially the Republican senators, Mitch McConnell specifically. And on the other side, we still have to keep pushing for comprehensive immigration reform, because our parents are still not without protection from deportation, and that is a big concern, especially if Trump gets reelected. Our community is going to see even more suffering and more threats from the president. But we still have to keep pushing for comprehensive immigration reform, no matter whether we have a Daca fix or not. And then we also, in California, we did keep in our lawsuit with the 6 named plaintiffs, the issue of information sharing from USCIS to ICE, and all the other lawsuits weren't successful in maintaining that issue alive. But that's the only thing that remains still active in our lawsuit. Should we see, instead of USCIS opening the applications, should we see instead USCIS sharing information from DACA recipients to ICE for enforcement purposes, then we're going to keep litigating that specific issue. So we have to be vigilant to see whether DACA recipients are being put in a detention center or in removal proceedings, and if so, then please contact me, and we'll share with our legal team to move forward on those specific cases. We have seen this administration put DACA recipients in detention centers already, and some in removal proceedings, and some have been deported. And so it's as a not necessarily a next step, but it's something that we should remain doing, is be vigilant with that.
Yeah, I have
Yeah.
colleagues that have had people in removal that didn't commit any crime or anything. They're suddenly just moving forward on that, which is totally unexpected.
Mhm.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Does anyone want to speak up? We have about 20 minutes, maybe a little less, for this session. Yes, Sally?
Yeah, thanks, Rosa. And boy, just deep gratitude to our speakers this morning for coming on absolutely such short notice and giving us such a thorough professional presentation and understanding of what the situation is. So we really appreciate it. And every time we have one of these sessions, we have new friends, we have new relationships, new contacts that we make, and that everybody on this call now has the contact with the two of you. And I really appreciate, Dulce, your comment about if you hear of any of this happening, please let you know. I guarantee you we will do that. I just want to make a comment. For a number of years, I represented the Loreto community at the United Nations. And one of the annual recognition days that we participated in was the International Day of the Girl. And one thing I will never forget from my many years there at the UN is this one particular celebration of International Day of the Girl. We had a panel of girls speaking inside the UN, and one of them was a dreamer, undocumented, at 15 years old. And just the courage and the strength and the fortitude that she displayed to speak at the UN, of all places, about her status and her commitment to continuing to advocate for the human rights of undocumented migrants in this country. Just, it was astounding, and I'll remember her forever. I just wanted to share that with y'all.
Thank you. I just put my email address into the chat if anybody thinks of something later on. And if Dulce, if you can share yours as well, so we know how to reach out to you.
I have a question and a comment. The comment is, there was a letter to the editor in the Denver Post the day before yesterday saying how we should allow the Dreamers to stay, but the whole letter was great. And then the last line was about the horrible parents that brought their kids here. And I really think we need to push back against that narrative, because you or I would have brought our kids here.
That's what I've actually gotten in, I'm sure most of you being, more Christ-minded than maybe I am wouldn't approve of this, but I've actually gotten into arguments with people because I've said, gosh, if you think it's okay for somebody to break into your house, murder your husband, but you're not going to go to your next door neighbor and ask for help, you're not a very good parent. People are like, well, I never, but I always just put it on them. I'm like, how would you feel? Because most of these folks who are coming here, it's not because, we did a workshop, an immigration workshop with a lot of donors to a nonprofit. So most of them were actually not already, they were mostly white. They were mostly, maybe not mostly conservative, but at least half, if not mostly. And we had a panel of asylees and refugees, and everybody commented afterwards that they hadn't really realized that people don't want to come to the United States. They actually have to come because they actually love their country. They spoke so passionately about the country that they came from, and they were like, I love my country, but my husband was killed, or my father was kidnapped, or whatever it was, or in many cases just we could not feed our family. We didn't have anything. So that's why they're coming. And so the idea that they should have just stayed home. That's why I say, so I when I have gotten into this conversation, I try not to, because if somebody's already that in that mindset, it's hard to convince them otherwise. But I have said that. I've been like, so you're telling me somebody breaks in your house, kills your husband, you're going to stick around rather than go ask your next door neighbor for help? You're a terrible parent.
I guess my question is, and I'm sorry that I'm so ignorant, but who initiated your suit against the Trump administration? I know the ACLU does a lot of that kind of thing. You probably said it and I just missed it. Who initiates these lawsuits?
Yeah, there were a lot of different lawsuits because there were so many people that were upset at the president and the rescission of DACA, including private companies, tech companies. There were different states. The state of California itself filed its lawsuit. Different cities. One of the first ones in California was the city of San Jose. The NAACP, a number of human rights organizations. There were over 100 different lawsuits that formed a coalition at the end. And so when we went to the Supreme Court in November and we had a convening, it was over 100 different organizations that showed up that day. Here in California, the very first lawsuit that was filed in the U.S. by named plaintiffs that were DACA recipients, we were 6 of them, but I was contacted by a colleague of mine. His name is Luis Cortez, who's also an undocumented DACA recipient lawyer. And he proposed this project to me. His family wasn't exactly on board with him participating because it would mean that we would be put in a spotlight. And sure enough, like one of the first things I did was I asked my family for essentially permission. I mean, I'm an adult, but I'm never, I never stopped being my mom's daughter. So the first thing I did was, I remember when he called, it was right after the announcement that DACA was ending, and then Luis calls me, and then within an hour, I talked to my family. My mom said, yeah, who cares if we end up being deported? We're going to get deported anyways with this administration, so might as well go out with a fight. And so, you have to do this because it's bigger than DACA. It's about every undocumented immigrant in this country. We need to show him that we can't just sit back and take all these inhumane policies. And this is in my mom's eyes too. She thought this was cruel what they were doing. And so my mom gave me her blessing, and then I talked to my older brother, who also said he didn't. My older brother used cuss words. He wasn't as eloquent as my mother, and he said, "Yeah, go get him." But right away, the next day, we were preparing the documents, and we filed on September 18, 2017, as individuals. And sure enough, the day that the news broke out that we were filing this, I received death threats immediately. Trump supporters saying, go back to Mexico. This is in your country. How dare you? You have no right to sue. And in my mind, I'm like, how much more American is it that we file lawsuits, right? Like filing a lawsuit, I think that's pretty American. And so the threats didn't stop. We still get them, but and so I understand why Luis declined to participate as a named plaintiff. Eventually, he ended up doing a lot of the representation as a lawyer, and he was actually at the table next to Ted Olson, arguing in front of the Supreme Court. And so we saw for the first time an undocumented lawyer in front of the Supreme Court representing undocumented folks, which was in itself a huge win for the movement. But there were so many briefs that were filed in support as well. And as Julia was mentioning, when you have this much support from America, over 70% of Americans supporting this program, all kinds of briefs were filed in support from employers to nonprofits. I think Google filed its own brief too, and many tech companies filed as well. I neglected to mention earlier that there is a study that came out that over 30,000 DACA recipients have been on the front lines fighting during this world pandemic, and that includes doctors. One of our named plaintiffs is a doctor. His name's New. And like him, there's other doctors and nurses that are undocumented DACA recipients on the front lines right now, helping us get through this pandemic. And so
a lot of teachers too.
Yeah, a lot of teachers. We had a named plaintiff medium who's also a teacher. We had a mental health expert also as a named plaintiff. Actually, 2 teachers in our lawsuit. So a lot of students that would have been left without a teacher. Mm-hmm.
Let me come in and say, you know, Loreto, the Loreto community is a national congregation. And one of the questions that always comes up when we have these types of engagements and speakers is, you know, what can we do as a community to support you, to help you in this fight, in this struggle?
Yeah, I really like the question and the comment earlier about our parents. We have to decriminalize and our immigrant community, and we do have to be mindful of our language. I mean, we don't have to do a big grand thing like filing a lawsuit. We can do it every single day on the language that we use, because I was growing up here in California during an era that was called the Prop 187 era, where we had this guy, Pete Wilson, whose rhetoric was very similar to what we're hearing today from Trump and
Governor of California.
Yeah. His rhetoric made it onto DC, and eventually that kind of language made it into the books. You know, that's how we have IRA of 96, you know, these policies that criminalize migration, that punish us for crossing the border. You know, you cross it once and twice, it becomes already a crime. And so it's the language that we use every day. My older brother, who I was talking about earlier, whose hand I was holding when I walked in here, he was also a kid when we came in. He was 7 years old, and he was left out of the program because he had just turned 31 when it was announced. And by a few months, he was left out of the program. So since then, he has seen me take advantage of DACA, and he still doesn't have any protection from deportation, which is terrifying. And so he's one of the people that I keep fighting for, and I'm mindful of when we talk about these policies. But you know, the language matters a lot. And so when you hear people refer to our immigrant community by the worst of names, even including from the top, from this president, we have to speak out, because otherwise that's how we're going to keep getting these cruel policies that punish asylum seekers for asking for help, that put kids in cages, that keep wanting us to be oppressed, and use us just for our labors and only for our contributions, instead of seeing us as human, seeing our stories as people. Ultimately, I think that's why we won this case on its so-called technicality with the Supreme Court, because I think our stories did make an impact on those justices, and they were looking for a way to protect us, and they found one. I really think that they did hear us when we were telling our stories, even at the Supreme Court level, even with technical language. I really do think that we were being seen as humans at that point.
Yeah, I find that a lot of people respond to individual stories, and I think that's why you see so many politicians say, you know, Joe the plumber or whatever, whoever they're going to choose in the audience, because that's that people go, oh, wait a minute, I can see that now, as opposed to a mass of 700,000 people or however many million people. So I think one way, in response to your question about how can we help, in addition to obviously, you know, talking to the senators and legislators, is to highlight the individual stories. Like Dul says, you know, just telling the story of, even if you don't mention somebody's name, if you happen to know a person that you've helped in your community, in your church, wherever, and you can say, this family had this happen to them, and what else could they have done? And then putting the question to the other people. The only response I've ever gotten that I don't know what to do with at that point is, how we can't help everybody. And then you're just like, well, you know, it's up to you to either decide you're going to help who you can help, or just, you know, be selfish and be your own person. But once they hear individual stories, that really is where the only place they can go at that point is, because there's normally, if they hear the individual stories, they don't say that person should have stayed home at that point. They just go, well, we can't help. I mean, there's billions of people in the world and they all want to come to the United States. We can't help everybody. So then you kind of have to go to the, you know, what can you do in your small sphere, you know, of influence? What can you do? Who can you help?
Thank you. I think just
I
in
gotta
the couple.
look off. I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
yes, you do, because I know you have something at 9. I want to thank you. If everyone can just, you know, show your appreciation to Dulce. Thank you for joining us, and thank you also to Cristal Felix, an attorney at the American Bar Association of the Immigrant Justice Program in San Diego, who helped facilitate this connection with Dulce. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Really
if you can share your email, Dulce, with somebody, or if somebody can give it to me, I would love to have it. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. You're part of our Loreto family now. Thank you. Okay. I think that Beth had one question, if it could be quick, and we can direct it to Julia.
Thank you, Rosa. And thank you, Julia, for your time today, and Dulce as well. And thank you both for the risks that you have taken and will continue to take in this arena. I'm a Loreto co-member. I serve as the current United Nations rep, attempting to follow in the large shoes that Sally left behind. And I want to wish everyone a happy United Nations Charter Day. Today is the 75th anniversary of the signing of the United Nations Charter. So it's a big day, 75th anniversary of the UN. And just one quick thought on another thing we could possibly do in the Loreto community, which the Latin American Caribbean Committee is pretty good at doing, but our community as a whole could do much better. Rosa, we're actually an international community. We have sisters in Pakistan. We have sister communities in both Ghana and Guatemala. How do we talk about that every single day? How do we recognize that? How do we get beyond the nationalism, which many of us who are white have had drummed into us since we were small and first heard fireworks at a July 4th celebration? How do we walk through and work through our nationalism just like our white privilege, just like our white fragility? Can we put it all in the same container and work with it, compost it so that we can then nourish the gardens of a fruitful society for all? Because many of the people I know who have tried to immigrate or come from Honduras, for example, would not be coming if there were not a huge drought there and they weren't climate refugees. So I guess my question is, now that there's an international convention on both migration and international convention on refugees at the UN level, is that helpful at all? And then I have a question for both of you, which is, could we have one of our interns interview you for our next Loreto at the UN e-newsletter? So I'll ask you, Julia, and we'll have to find Dulce some other way.
I'm happy to talk with anybody who wants to talk to me. I'm sure that you guys have more ideas than I do as far as how to use your networks to kind of expand, you know, the reach internationally. Excuse me. I find that people knowing, you know, individuals that are affected helps. So maybe that's a way to do it, is to connect different parts of your, you know, your community and say, well, who do you know? Or even if somebody has tried to come and hasn't been able to come, can they highlight their story, that kind of thing. I just had a thought and it just went right out of my head again. So, but yeah, if anybody else has some ideas of how you can kind of use I love what you said about, you know, expanding our talk, because everybody's talking now about white fragility and what we can do nationally. Internationally, yeah, it really is just seeing kind of what individuals from other countries have experienced when they've either tried to come here or when they've decided to stay but they wanted to leave, what's happened to them and that kind of thing. My family, somebody's asking, my family is from Nicaragua. They are my mother was born in Managua, and we still have lots of family in Managua. And my dad was born in Granada, but moved to Managua. So yeah. So Kitty says she's met from Matagalpa. That's very cool.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Beth, for that reminder that we are an international.
You know, one of the, people get tired of me quoting Just Mercy's Brian Stevenson, but he had four suggestions, and one is be proximate. And I feel like the LACC gives people an opportunity to be proximate with people, either letter writing or sending books or visiting detention centers. I know that when I first got involved with Dreamers, it was at the Loreto Heights campus that a group of us, a huge citywide group of us, were helping people with their paperwork. We had a list of things that they needed to show. And folks, these parents were just so dear, bringing their young family members in with boxes of utility bills just to prove that they had been in this country and hadn't left it. And we would just check off what they did. And when it was all checked off, they'd go back and speak to an immigration lawyer like Julia to make sure they had all their ducks in the row. So maybe if Daca comes back, being one of those people, because the Daca kids speak English, the parents probably understood it, but were shy, but the kids you could communicate with just fine.
That's something they can be doing now. If you know people who are possibly fit those qualifications that are that I spoke about that are available still on uscis.gov, you just look up DACA. That's a way to find it, and it'll say what the guidelines are, even though it'll say that it's outdated, but it's still the same guidelines. And basically, that's what I'm doing with people who are contacting me, is saying, okay, at the moment, what I want you to do is start looking for all those records, like you said, medical records, school records, any kind of employment, like if you can show that the child has been living with you, if your own pay stubs, that kind of thing. Certainly if they have lawful entry, which a lot of them do, they just came in as visitors and then they didn't leave. And then you'd have, excuse me, the I-94 is the little form that they give. They used to give it as a form. Now it's just an electronic record of entry. So those kind of things. But yeah, if that's somebody, if you know somebody, you can say, hey, why don't you look at the website, see if you qualify. And if you do, just start pulling together records. And then maybe there will probably be workshops for people who can't afford an attorney once they start doing, because we definitely have DACA renewal workshops that happen. But as far as the new applications are much harder than the renewals, because the renewal, you just show that you haven't gotten in any trouble since the last time, and then you pay a bunch of money. But the new ones, it'll be like you're saying, all those records.
Thank you, Julia. I've gotten one request from Bob Keys, our partner in Arizona. And so if you can bear with us just a couple more minutes, Bob. I think you got to unmute.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So, yeah, I spoke with Mary Jean yesterday. I wanted to share something with. I shared something with her, and I wanted to share it with the whole community. A couple of weeks ago, I had communicated with a woman, because I do the prison work, visitations, but now they've been suspended since March, but still continuing to communicate via phone call and letters. I received a call from a woman, and she was describing to me the conditions that were going on in Eloy. And I mean, they were always bad, but they're much, much worse now because of the virus. So she was laying out all of these things. And I said, would you please write me a letter and describe what's going on in there? I hadn't heard anything from her in weeks, and I thought maybe there were repercussions because of the phone call, because they do monitor phone calls, and there are repercussions from time to time. So on Wednesday, I received a huge yellow envelope with 22 letters from women in Eloy describing what was going on in the prisons. And the theme is, there's the horrific conditions, but every one of the letters was asking, pleading, begging for help. Please let people know what's going on in here. And over half of them literally said, I don't want to die in here.
Yeah.
I mean, and I sent the letter to Mary Jean, and I think she was going to share it. And if you want to share it with the whole community, because it's redacted, so the name is not on there. And so my goal is to reach out. I'm trying to reach out to national news outlets to see if people want to run this story. You know, I'm going to reach out to some people today that I know. So if anybody knows of anyone, please, this is too important to sit on. I think we need to. And Julia, I think when you're talking about the stories, you know, the stories of people really, you know, really touch people and people can connect. And when you read, and I've read all 22 of the letters, and you know, they make you cry. I mean, people that are, you know, one Cuban woman said, I left Cuba because I had no freedom of speech. And I can't speak freely in here or they will put me in solitary.
Yeah. And it's not just the border, it's the detention centers. Maureen's very familiar with our detention center in Aurora. I know she's there every week protesting, or at least she was. But right now they are fumigating the pods. And so everybody's getting, like, because there's been this problem with COVID outbreaks. So now they're doing some kind of chemical treatment where it's causing swelling and nosebleeds and respiratory distress. All kinds of things are happening, and that's in our, you know, local community, not even the border. The border, they have, you know, I mean, you've seen pictures, I'm sure, or videos of the conditions that people are in, where they're all crammed into a cage, and all they have is this silver aluminum blankets. So yeah, that is definitely a good thing to highlight. If you will, I have to figure out how I can get some email addresses from you guys to see who might be interested in those stories that you're talking about, because I know that there's press people that are you know, that are looking at these stories and are interested in sharing them.
Yeah.
I think Mary Jane wants to come in. Yes.
I read a couple of the letters that Bob sent me, and they're horrific. And so Bob was able to scan the letters, and he can get them out to, or if you got them to you, Julia, or maybe one of us on LACC.
Yeah, because I'm on the media committee, or I'm the chair of our local media committee for AILA, which is American Immigration Lawyer Association, and I can send them actually to the national person to see if she knows who would like to, you know.
And you put your email in the chat.
Yeah, I did.
Get it, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We're going to have to close, but on behalf of Loreto's Latin American and Caribbean Committee, thank you, Julia Guzman. Thank you so much for informing us and inspiring us. And Dulce Garcia, who had to step off. Thank you, Maureen, for pulling this together. And thank you, colleagues from the LACC and Loreto, for joining us today.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, team.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Man, that was wonderful. Oh,
That really was.
oh.
Do you want to stop recording?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, as we congratulate ourselves.